All right, we're going to start a little early here. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. If you can, let me know in the chat if you can hear me. I'm going to wait for a couple people to get in here if anyone's watching, but I saw your comment there, Lucy Bean. But I wanted to specifically go over this story. And as the world falls apart, there's a financial crisis, banking crisis, all here at home, which is also going on overseas. A lot of people forget, oh, by the way, there's a war too that we're financing. And what's the end game there? What's the end game of the war? A lot of people say, well, what's actually going to happen is Putin's going to be like, sorry, you won, and leave. And everyone's going to high five and everything's going to be okay. That's not, I can guarantee you this. That's not how it's going to go. So I wanted to go over this story that really goes into how the war is actually going in Ukraine. We'll give you kind of a barometer as to what Washington's going to do here. This is from a guy named Douglas McGregor. He's a retired colonel in the Army. If you really want to know what's going on over there, he does a great job of covering it. And let's just say a lot of things coming out of Washington aren't true. He writes, the crisis in American national power has begun. America's economy is tipping over, and the Western financial markets are quietly panicking, imperiled by rising interest rates. Mortgage-backed securities and U.S. Treasuries are losing their value. The market's proverbial vibes, feelings, emotions, beliefs, and psychological pensions suggest a dark turn is underway inside the American economy. So you got to wonder, what is our desire to finance a war overseas if this stuff is going on at home? Russian economy, a force operating in southern Ukraine, appeared to have successfully ground down attacking Ukrainian forces with the minimal expenditure of Russian lives and resources, while Russians' implementation of attrition warfare, meaning we've got more people than you, right? So they're playing the long game. They're waiting and waiting and waiting and picking off Ukrainians as they as they come, and they have more firepower and more people. So if it's a war of attrition, who wins that one? The group with more firepower and more people. Their attrition warfare worked brilliantly. Russia mobilized its reserves of men and equipment to field a force that is several magnitudes larger and significantly more lethal than it was a year ago. Russia's massive arsenal of artillery systems, including rockets, missiles, drones, linked to overhead surveillance platforms, converted Ukrainian soldiers fighting to retain the northern edge of the Donbass into pop-up targets. How many Ukrainian soldiers have died is unknown, but the recent estimate wages between 150 and 200,000 Ukrainians. So if the West and Ukraine continue to say, well, the only option here, because you got to be a realist, and as I've said many times, the enemy gets a vote. And if you say the enemy's Russia here, Russia gets a vote. And if you assume that Russia's just going to, clap hands and say, sorry about that, I think that's a false assumption. So if it's just Ukraine on the ground fighting, Ukraine's going to lose. They're going to lose. And it's only a matter of how many people need to die before that realization comes to them. In contrast, the Soviet Union's ham-fisted and ideological-driven foreign policy making and execution, contemporary Russia has skillfully cultivated support for its cause in Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. This is in contrast to the United States and Europe, and people in the United States and in Europe are starting to feel the pinch, if they haven't already, of the economic policies and the lack of energy in Europe. I read a story about the oldest, I think it was like the oldest company in the world. It was like a metal smelting factory in Germany, just declared bankruptcy. It lasted through 2 world wars. It had been around since like the 1400s. It's been around forever, and it declared bankruptcy. Why? There's no energy. Okay. In fact, the West's economic sanctions damaged the U.S. and European economies while turning the Russian ruble, into one of the international system's strongest currencies that has hardly enhanced Washington's global standing. So you all know what happened. We said, hey, we're going to sanction them. We're going to isolate them. What does it serve to do? I don't know if you guys saw, Xi Jinping just visited Russia, and they had a grand old time, and they're now friends, frenemies, if you will. I'm sure they don't trust each other, but we didn't necessarily trust Joseph Stalin during World War II, but we were allies with him to defeat the Germans. So this has happened in history before. In sum, Washington's military strategy to weaken, isolate, and even destroy Russia is a colossal failure, and the failure puts Washington's proxy war with Russia in a truly dangerous path. To press on undeterred in the face of Ukrainians' descent into oblivion ignores three metastasizing threats: persistent high inflation and rising interest rates, and America's bank failures, the threat to stability and prosperity inside European societies, already reeling from several waves of unwanted refugees and migrants, and the threat of a wider European war. So, all these things are happening while we're having a bank crisis, as you guys know. And so here we are. The question is, and what I think is going to happen here is Washington's going to start softening the blow. Ukraine's actually not winning. There's more losses, and they're going to start negotiating. So what you're hearing out of Washington now, which is Ukraine is pushing forward and Russia's moving back, is totally untrue. And to be a realist is to say Russia gets a vote, and their vote matters. So if we don't negotiate with them now, it's just a matter of how many Ukrainians die. You've got to ask yourself, how many people are going to actually be keen on giving them more money, artillery, and firepower as we're having problems at home. So let's take a look at your questions. So you got 7 or 8 of you watching here. First question here from Lucy Bean. Now that the end game is clear, what should we do in our community to prepare? Form mutual assistance groups. Obviously, store lead, silver, and food. What else to do? So I think I'm going to do a video tomorrow on what hyperinflation looks like. And remember, we have to deleverage one way or another. There's a lot of people on Twitter, people I respect, like Daniel DiMartino Booth, that are saying, hey, actually what Jerome Powell is doing is trying to create deflation. I don't necessarily buy that because he's bailing out banks, but we have to deleverage one way or another. Deflation meaning banks fail, people lose money, and so there's not a lot of money to go around, people lose jobs, depression style, or through inflation or hyperinflation. I think they're going to choose hyperinflation. It's just a matter of how long it takes them. But I think what Jerome Powell did, which you said the end game, which was bailing out SVB, that kind of told me what they're willing to do. So any pain that comes, they're going to bail them out. So what to do? I think strong communities, the world's been through this before. So I always look back at history and see how people did things. But one thing that's unique in our society is we have a lot of jobs where people don't have any life skills, right? They're a TikToker or whatnot. They don't know how to change the oil. They don't know how to grow food. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to do any of that. But a strong local community and localizing your food source, water source, ideally your power source. Not everyone has that ability, but as much as you can, be self-sufficient for a couple of months. Do I think it's going to get to that? It's a possibility. That's for sure. It's a possibility. And remember, as I've said many times, banking system is a confidence game. Confidence is easily lost. There's people, this run on the banks to a certain extent is just lack of confidence. Okay. These banks still had the money, but it is lack of confidence. What up, financial prepper? Thanks for tuning in. You're early. I like that. Oh, yeah. Hit that like button. Hey, thanks. Yes. Let's see here. Drop your questions, guys, in the chat if you got any. Watching two enemies fight each other is fairly entertaining. Wish there were no deaths, though. They should be using paintballs. Yeah, I think you're talking about Russia and Ukraine. What is odd to me about Russia and Ukraine is the open propaganda coming out of Washington about how Ukraine's winning. I guess winning is relative, but no, they're not. They're not. And in war is logistics. War is attrition, number of people you have. Can you bring more people to the front lines? Are you running out of ammo, which Ukraine said they were after we gave them hundreds of billions of dollars? It doesn't look good, right? So if it's just Ukraine on the ground, they should negotiate sooner rather than later. It's out of control. They're trying to explain away the fact that it's falling apart. Yeah, I think the last thing you want as a central planner is pandemonium, right? Because they still need the plebes to do their job and take out the garbage and make things run on time and all that kind of stuff. They still need that. So if they have the plebes, the normies going, hey, wait a second, that's how the banking system works? Hey, wait a second, what's fractional reserve lending? You have to, what I'm trying to say is bread and circuses only work if there's bread and circuses, right? You can distract people, but if you don't have anything to distract them with, meaning they don't have their money anymore, meaning they can't purchase anything because inflation is so high, then there's civil unrest, unfortunately. Lucy Bean. My business is taking in a sizable deposit from an investor way outside the deposit insurance. I can't use a big bank. What do I do? Well, I can tell you what I would do. Spread it out to multiple banks if possible. And if not, I know this is a cardinal sin to a lot of people, but maybe purchase some short term T bills with that money, using a money market fund or whatnot, if you have to keep it in dollars. So that's what I would do if it's more than FDIC insurance. Which, by the way, FDIC isn't that interesting. Nobody Special did a great video on this about the contagion, like the unintended consequences of Jerome Powell and Yellen's literally shoot from the hip. SVB's failing. Okay, we're going to back all banks that we view as systemic problem, up to and including infinity dollars. All right, cool. So you may have seen my video the other day, and I kind of got this from Nobody Special. If you are in a small bank, why would you stay there? If you're in a European bank, that's huge. If you're in a European bank or any bank around the world, why would you stay there? If a country is offering infinity insurance and it's free, why wouldn't you go? So this has colossal unintended consequences, as all central planning does, not just here in America, but around the world. Elijah, what up? The man Eric, oh yeah. All-nighter hider, propaganda is as old as politicians. Yeah, funny little story about me. I actually teach propaganda. I work in interrogation, something called SEER, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. The resistance portion is teaching people how to avoid propaganda in captivity. And propaganda has always been so interesting to me, like what you can convince a person of. And mainly I like to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you got your basic needs: food, water, shelter, clothing, and medical attention, and you're not really making art, and a society isn't advancing, and people aren't thinking outside the box until they have their basic needs met. Now, why does propaganda typically work in a captivity environment or in desperation? It's because people are looking for any kind of hope. If you want to know a little bit more about propaganda in World War II, number one, the Holocaust Museum in DC has a propaganda exhibit that's absolutely awesome. But two, there's a World War II in color on Netflix that goes over German propaganda. It's quite fascinating because, we're no different today. Propaganda is used on all sides. The question is, do you believe it? Oftentimes the best propaganda is something you obviously don't know is propaganda, right? And typically people fall for it way more when they don't have their basic needs met. Man, redeem for lawful money only. I actually don't know what that is. Ah, gotcha. Question from All Night Hider. Have you watched Mark Moss' video from last night where he interviewed Dr. Malone on 5th generation warfare? I started that. I did not get too into that. But I'm familiar with the topic outside of that video. If he's talking about, one thing I've researched is DNA weapons, so they can release a virus or release an aerosol, like something in the air, that only affects certain DNA compounds or certain DNA constructs, or certain blood types. And so they can kind of target with precision and avoid other people, if that makes sense, with aerosolized viruses. Right, running out of questions, guys. Let me know if you have any more. Let's see, from Lucy. I'm in Canada, so buying U.S. Treasuries is out of my league. Yeah, let me know how the Canada's. I've heard. I did an interview with. What's his channel's name? I'm forgetting it. It'll come to me. Market Mania. He covers Canadian real estate, and it seems real bad, almost worse than the United States. Same thing with the debt problem. So I'd love to know, Lucy, what you think about that. Yeah, 23andMe. We can get your DNA from. If they want to, they'll get your DNA, whoever they is. But this mass culling of like, here's one of the things I think about, like government control. Like most people can vote their way into, and you probably heard this, you can vote your way into communism, got to shoot your way out. But why do people vote their way in? Because they're looking for some kind of hope. But why do they always have to shoot their way out? Because it eventually leads to human oppression, right? So what's critical mass where people start to wake up, where people go, hey, wait a second, you've hit the pain point, and now I'm pissed. They're normal people who don't pay attention to this kind of stuff, which, to be honest, I don't think you have. Well, I think it's important to pay attention to, but people should be able to live their lives and assume that politicians are doing their job. But fortunately, in today's world, maybe that's a fantasy of mine that you used to be able to do that. But today's world, you have to pay very close attention because they are literally stealing your labor by printing money. But that critical mass to me, and that pain point, is inflation or deflation, which is one of the two things are going to happen in short order. And so people are going to start asking questions, which I think why people who watch this channel, all the channels I recommend, they're going to play a pivotal part, because these people are going to come to YouTube, they're going to look online and like, why is this not working? Because everything the politician says they're going to do, and they hit the easy button, it just makes it worse. Why? They're going to look for answers. So that's when I think you're going to get maybe family and friends who are a little bit more attentive to your crazy uncle conspiracy theories, because a lot of people don't want to listen to me, which is why I started a YouTube channel. Very interesting. We can think of theories. It seems they can too. Yeah, the other thing about 5th gen warfare and propaganda is we kind of, one of the consequences of freedom, which is necessary, kind of like a consequence of the Second Amendment, means you're kind of unsafe, right? If you're free, doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe if you're in a totalitarian government. But freedom comes with risks, and one of those risks is foreign governments able to divide and conquer, and so they're able to stir up division, shall we say, in the United States. Yeah, I definitely think they're doing a very good job of that. Oh, no problem, Lucy. Thanks for tuning in while you're driving. Yes, I agree. I think that's human nature, that human beings look at the path of least resistance, but you got to choose your hard, if that makes sense, right? So um, you can choose the path of obesity and clogged arteries and all that kind of stuff, but that's hard one day, right? One day when you have to go to the doctor and he says you're dying of diabetes or whatnot. So it's either going to be forced on you or you're going to do it to yourself, which is one of the things about paying attention to economics and finance and the kind of stuff we talk about on this channel is it ain't easy being the one person in your circle of friends who's like, hey guys, this whole economic system is falling apart. I just wanted to warn you. And you're like, shut up, conspiracy theorist. It's not easy being that person. And sometimes I question if I'm crazy being that guy, but you got to choose your heart. So those people aren't paying attention. Those people, a ton of people in America and Canada and most of the Western world are massively overleveraged. Their life is overleveraged. They live on credit cards. They're paycheck to paycheck. There's a good book on this called The Millionaire Next Door. And this guy studies people with $1 million net worths. And who would have thunk it? They're mostly blue collar, make 100,000. This was back in the early 2000s, but make $100,000 a year. They're not the people that make 250, 500,000, because as those people's lifestyle, as those people's uh, salaries go up, their lifestyle does. So their payments do. And most doctors, most lawyers that he wrote in the book can't make it for a month if they were to lose their paycheck overnight. So yes, people choose the path of least resistance, but there's going to be an open ear, I can guarantee you that. As these problems come and as they manifest, there's going to be people in your life that are going to come to you asking questions. And we shouldn't be those people that go, hey, um, should have asked me before, have fun staying poor. We should definitely be those people trying to help them, because if anything solidifies an opinion, it's pain, right? And people are going to experience a lot of pain. And I think, people that listen to this channel should be empathetic to that and show them why this pain is being experienced and how to get out of it. At least how to move towards that. I'm an Alaskan salmon fisherman. That hat looks familiar, but can't put my finger on it. Yeah, it says fly fishing company out here in Colorado called Minturn Anglers. That's awesome. You're a salmon fisherman. In another life, that sounds. In college. I was a whitewater rafting guide, and that was one of the best jobs I ever had. Um, Now that I have kids, it's hard to do jobs like that. But fisherman sounds like fun. Um, Critical thinking is facing a liquidity crisis. Yeah, I've thought about this for a while. It's like, why? I've gone over this on my channel. Like, I'm no doctor, but there was many things over the last 2 years that, like, just critical thinking. You don't have to be a doctor. They're saying two opposite things. The authorities, right? Um, and that requires critical thinking skills. But human beings, and if you study history, this happens over and over and over again. We're kind of like fish. If you swim in the school, you're not noticed. If you go over there and you're wrong, that's the key, right? So let's say you're an authority figure and you speak out and you say, actually, you know what? That's not true. What all these other experts are saying. The cost of if you're wrong is absolute destruction of your career, right? Because you went out on a limb and you said what no one else was saying. So the cost of you being wrong with the crowd, pretty negligible, because everyone else was saying that. So human beings innately understand that risk. That's why it takes courage to say something. And sometimes it costs people a lot. And to be honest, so when you say critical thinking, there's a certain amount of self-preservation, I think, that's going on. And critical thinking costs people in today's world if you speak out to a certain degree, depending on your career field. All-Nighter Hider, I've tried telling people about economics and finance, posing questions to provoke thoughts seems to work better. I totally agree. Now, one of one of the questions I like asking people is, when those stimulus checks came out, why didn't they get? Shouldn't we give $1 million to everybody instead of whatever it was, 1,700? And they look at you like you're crazy because everyone would be a millionaire. So they get it, they understand, but they kind of have this kind of barometer in their head. Well, 1,700 is okay, but in the aggregate, if you look at the totals, you're like, well, where's it coming from? The government doesn't have any money. And I start to think. I totally agree with you. Asking questions helps a lot. Canada is about ready to balkanize. I doubt we last a year. Yeah, I think I haven't paid super close attention to Canadian politics, but I know you guys are way further left than even the United States is. Um, and it seems like you're in worse off shape economically. Could be wrong there, but I was looking at like I said, the real estate market, and it's insane. Um, and I actually saw this, um, and I'll probably do a story on it this week. Australia is looking to nationalize some of its real estate. Like the state buys up the real estate to control prices. There is no the central planners. There's no limit to their desire to seize power and control. The cool thing about economics, you can't virtue signal out of math. Electrical prepper, you're not crazy. I've been called a nut until I get random calls and texts. Yeah, ain't that the truth? Texts from people telling me I was right the whole time. You're not alone. Yeah, and that's one of the other reasons I started this channel. Is like, hey, I want to get with like-minded folks, because I think courage is contagious. I think knowing you're not alone is a good thing, and being a person who speaks truth, maybe that like plants a seed, and then other people want to do the same thing, and it has this kind of spreading effect. All Nighter Hider, 11th season for me in Naknek. Did I pronounce that correctly? Alaska. It's the best misery I've ever lived through in a strange addiction. Yeah, in the military, we call that type B fun. It's one of those things like during it, you're like, why the heck am I doing this? But then after, you're like, it's like stories for a lifetime, right? And that's normally the best. Electrical prepper. Not my wife, though. She's always right. Ain't that the truth? Yeah, my wife gets sick of me talking about this. She's not super into economics. She doesn't have to be, but she's slowly, starting to see some things, and she's like, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," especially when it comes to kiddos and her mama bear stuff comes out, which is awesome. So, but when I talk to her about this, her eyes start to glaze over, and it's like I'm speaking Klingon. Even if you love someone, think has a moral duty to warn them somehow. I think one has a moral duty to warn them somehow. Yeah, no, I agree. But at the end of the day, I have realized, part of me warning people is this YouTube channel. And I talk to my family fairly often, but the one thing I try to focus on, if they're willing to pay attention, is math. And me being an instructor for a long time, you can't inject ideas into somebody's. They have to be open to hearing what you have to say. So if that person doesn't want to listen, to a certain extent, that's on them. You tried. Taking thoughts to the extremes and exaggerating possibilities tends to clarify the nuances. Yeah, I agree. I like I just like to ask leading questions. That's what I tend to like set the hook with people and like get them questioning things. And what I mean by that is, like the last 2 years and the things that I was saying that don't necessarily make sense. Um, and like one of the questions I would ask is, if it's about safety, why didn't natural immunity, come into account? There could be an answer, but nobody had one, and nobody wanted to. At least got people thinking. Yeah, I agree. And talking about history, like history tends to rhyme, and I don't think Hitler would have come to power without hyperinflation in Germany. So one of the downsides, among many, is that, like I was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people get desperate. And so an authoritarian figure comes out when hyperinflation's going, people don't have work, yada, yada, yada. He says, I'll fix it. Or find somebody to blame. And people are ready and willing to listen. Yes, it's like the Bible says, some people sow the seeds and some people reap the harvest. Yeah, I agree. And that's something I focus on too. It's like, what do I have control over? And I did a video, maybe it was today or yesterday. It's like what I like to focus on. There's so much stuff going on today economically. It's like financial or economics YouTubers' wet dream. But it's like, look over here, squirrel, squirrel. And it's all kind of unraveling. And it honestly could take a lot longer than a lot of us think. But one thing I know is for certain, debasement is for certain. It's for certain. So if you understand it's getting closer every day and it's exponentially growing. So if it's 2x faster every year, right, it's getting faster and faster and faster. And because we have this massive debt problem, we're now at the end of that road where we have to pick inflation or deflation. And so I like to focus on giving people that little nugget, because if you give them all this bad news and then they say, okay, cool. So what do I do? I worry. Then they're like, okay. But for me, it's like, hey, if you're one of the 1% of people that sees what's going on and you buy assets that the government can't print more of, and you prepare your family when everything is pandemonium, if it gets there, you're sitting back and you're planning. You're thinking clearly, etc. You reap what you sow, ain't that the truth? Canada doesn't even have a signed national charter. Quebec is ready to leave. Is that where's it? Alberta with the conservative gal that was just. She was like, "Hey, I don't want the few backwards in my or what was it? There was money going to the few backwards, and she kind of rescinded that. I think she was out of Alberta. All right, question: are you aware of the surety bonds? And state agents and even school board members must have an insurance against violating rights and due process through a tool we have to protect ourselves. I don't. I'm writing that down though. I'm going to look into that. Speaking of schools, one of the coolest things, especially if you have kids, there's a massive push towards school choice. And everything's about money, folks. One of the biggest donors to politicians is teachers union. So these massive conglomerates, the military industrial complex, teachers, this racial industrial complex that's going on, where's the money come from? Mostly taxpayers, right? So if you take that out of this forced kind of Ponzi scheme where you have to pay property taxes whether you like it or not, and it has to go to this crappy school whether you like it or not, even if your kid doesn't go there. Instead, you give that voucher to a child and their parents are able to choose what school the child goes to, and they're able to choose based off of merit. There's a reason teachers unions don't like that, and it takes a lot of power away from them, which I'm all about. Do you think this is their actions? Do you think this is their action to the inevitability of the destruction of the economy, or reaction to the result of economic warfare? Um, so I'm in, people are typically in two camps. Everyone in Washington's an idiot, right? But then they think they have this massive cabal where they're moving chess pieces around the globe and causing all this nasty stuff. And maybe people think that's the Rothschilds and it's people behind the scenes. It's very hard to control 8 billion people. So I'll tell you that. So a good example is SVB failed. They had a meeting, and they had the tools, but they had to have the meeting to come up with said tool. Most of it is shooting from the hip, in my humble opinion. And because Washington's so corrupt, because it's been corrupted to the point where a narcissist can get in there and actually do narcissistic things and cheat the system and do insider trading and not get punished, who's it going to attract? So it attracts more and more narcissistic people, but I don't think they're necessarily smart. I mean, look at, I mean, I'm not making fun of him, but John Fetterman, right? They elected a man who has a brain damage because of a stroke. And then look at the president. Okay, these aren't super intelligent people, but then maybe there's people behind the scenes, but mostly I think it's just greedy people who are shooting from the hip. A lot of politicians are like that. They're concerned about power and control. Power and control. So what is it that gets them power and control? Is it paying off student loan debt? Let's do that. Does that cause massive inflation? Who cares? I don't care. It's after I get elected. I'm not an economics guy, but deal with a lot of numbers. So you guys explain pretty well what's going on, and it helps us explain better to others. Hey, I appreciate that. I try. I just started learning. I've always been interested in personal finance, but not necessarily macro. It wasn't until 2020 I started looking into this, and I was like, oh my, this is gotta get the word out here. Since you have kids, is there public school and the board members are messing around? We can go after their surety bondholders, and then the bondholder goes after them. Oh, I'm gonna look into that. My kids are homeschooled right now, but I prefer for them to go to school. So we'll see. We shall see. But I'm going to look into that surety bond. I wrote that down. Folks have to be reasonable to be receptive. So many are not. Now, what causes them to be reasonable? Pain. And there's pain coming, unfortunately. So if they have economic pain in their life, groceries are going through the roof, they can't afford a house, yada, yada, yada. Right now, the government's offering them solutions because they still have a little bit of cake and circus or bread and circuses left. But that's not going to last forever. Why? Because we have it's going to either cause inflation or deflation. And if they're handing out bread and circuses, it's going to cause inflation. So they can only keep the people happy for so long. And if they run out of bread and circuses, people tend to get real pissed. And then be receptive to solutions, actual solutions. So if you don't operate in reality, reality wins every single time. You can delay it. You can pretend the math doesn't exist. You can try to paper over it. But reality comes barking back. And everyone watching this channel understands that. And so they're long on reality winning because it does every time. Reality being math. Agreed, Pete, but they will be more willing with more pain, unfortunately. Yeah, I know, like I just said. I see government representatives as both stupid and opportunistic. Yeah, I agree. Most politicians I don't trust. Unfortunately, economics and politics are one in the same boat right now because we don't have a free market. So people who blame this issue on capitalism, which politicians will do, are massively uninformed. And the first thing I say, if you think this is a capitalist system, how come the price of money is set by a third party? It's like that alone means we're not a free market. So how come we have bailouts, all that kind of stuff? But I just don't trust them as far as I can throw them. But one of the things I continually harp on is as Warren Buffett said, or maybe it was Charlie Munger, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. If the incentives in Washington is you can cheat, lie, and get rich, which it is, Republicans and Democrats, who's it going to attract? Do you know anybody who's like a good, solid person who's interested in politics? Like most people, you're like, that person That person should be in politics. They're good-hearted, they're like not interested at all. Unfortunately, there's some good people, right? But they're few and far between. And so it attracts these people who know that this is an opportunity, like you said, an opportunist. They look at it and they go, "That's my ticket to success," meaning wealth and power on $190,000 a year. Somehow they're millionaires, multimillionaires. Crazy. All right, guys, that's the last one for tonight. Appreciate you. There's 11 of you watching right now. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Love these AMAs. It's probably my favorite videos of the week. I got a lot of good ones coming out this week. The news is insane. If you haven't been following the CMB, the commercial mortgage-backed securities market is shining some signs of '08, right? And a lot of those commercial mortgage-backed securities are at regional banks. Those same regional banks who have runs going on them right now. So a lot of news to come out this week, but I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.